Perth Linux Users Group, talking Linux and open source.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. I was actually here giving a talk in 2015 or 2016, the state of JavaScript at SpaceCube, I think on level 4, B4. And it's kind of interesting to come back here again because I started coding in Perth like since I was 8 years old, and now I'm 30 something. And yeah, it's great how now there's actually a whole bunch of ecosystem here. I've been away for too long. But today, I'll be talking about Dorothy, a Dotfile ecosystem. Here's the link to its GitHub page, and that's where it will take you. And I will try my best to make that actually visible to everybody. General. Oh, it is all light. Why would this be in dark mode then? Just Firefox being Firefox, huh? All right. People can read that or not at all? All right. Let's see if I think there's a setting here, right? So. There we go. Now we can actually read what it says. All right, so there you go. All righty, there we go. So yeah, here's the Dorothy repo. So yeah, a better Dotfile ecosystem with cross-platform automation. Supports Fish, Z Shell, Bash, Mac, and Linux. 0 to hero minutes on new and existing machines. Here's a more full-fledged description of its features. So you can support multiple operating systems and architectures, your favorite terminals and editors. It configures your environment for also what you have installed in your system. Never do you have to edit your path or your man path or your XDG DIRs again, or your Ruby gem homes. And it can also install and maintain all your environment and your packages, make sure they're all up to date. Same with your Git SSH agent. So anything that you would kind of do in the terminal, it can provide assistance to you. And there's hundreds of commands now that have been built to provide that assistance. Some of those commands are really full fleshed out, and we'll be talking about them later. And blah, blah, blah. It's used on about 20 or 30 machines all up between the 5 people who use it daily. So, and these are just the ones, even for myself, I'm using them against that. So I have a, like is on Raspberry Pis, it's on all sorts of stuff. So there's some trial information there, some install information, but we'll go into that later. The reason why I'm wanting to give a talk now, why it's a good time, is I just landed this quarter's changes, or, landing the, you know what I mean, which is pretty much 32,000 lines changed. So it's been a big effort, and I'm really happy to share that. First, a shout out to our sponsors, or my sponsors, or Beverly sponsors, which is the collaborative that I use. So shout out to Elliot, shout out to Armin, shout out to Bolsa, and shout out to Rob Morris. If you want to learn more about me, that's my website. And this is the website for the community collaborative that I run called Beverly, and that's our philosophy podcast on YouTube. If you want to check that out. Now, we know probably what dot files are, or maybe have had some experience, but if you have never had that before, when we open up a terminal, as I'll do right now, it has a prompt which is either bash, Z shell, fish. On Mac OS versions, it has recently changed from bash to Z shell because of licensing conflicts. But as we type about things, we're interacting in an interactive shell prompt. Yep. Yeah. This one. Right, so right now we'll see, I'm actually in Fish right now, and we can see that Fish is at version 3.4.1. But the shells, they will load configuration. And those configuration is typically where, as developers or users or power users of our machines, we can put our extensions or the things that automate our daily workflow. So Dorothy actually started in 2013 as my personal Dotfiles. So we see here it was git ignore, user profile, and user RC. And if we go into here, it'll be something that most people's Dotfiles will probably look like load Ruby, load MVM, and a whole bunch of aliases. And over the years, I think now it's at how many commits? Over 2,000 commits over nearly 10 years now. It's evolved to a place where we've got 100 command sources and multiple people using it, and with the personalized configuration. So there's the Dorothy core, which is like this project, and then configuration goes in our user configuration. So this is my personal one, and this is another collaborator's extensions to his Dorothy install. All right. So in the talk today, we'll give some demos. So I kind of walk through a process of what that actually looks like, give some demos of the value, at least to me. And then towards the end, we can talk about maybe if you would like to give Dorothy a go, what it would be like, and also what coding in Dorothy looks like why is it so beneficial now to have 300 commands or whatever inside Dorothy? Why do I keep building on it all the time? So who's Dorothy for? Comfortable with a code editor, occasional terminal use. Want to get better with developer operations. And this is something which, like, if you have worked in enterprise before, there is a specific teams dedicated to improving developer productivity and improving the productivity of the engineering team. And they do it with private solutions. Sometimes some of those have open cores. But I kind of think like that Dorothy is essentially developer operations, collaborative developer operations for the open source or the everyday person. It's Unix only, Linux and Mac, no Windows. Maybe if anyone actually wants to sponsor Windows, then that's fine. I know that with Windows 11, you can run Ubuntu kind of in this subsystem thing. I tried to run it on this laptop in a VM, but it just slowed to a crawl and nothing happened. So maybe if sponsors want to pick that up, we can do it. Now, for the meantime, it's still collaborative mindset. Things may still break while it still matures and gets along its way. But the benefits far outweigh it, and that's why more and more people keep using it. So what's the value? So before Dorothy, one large dot file, we kind of saw that before. And maybe we'll have a whole bunch of functions, but it's specific to one shell. So in 2017, one of my friends was telling me about Fish Shell, this amazing shell where it actually auto-completes what I'm typing. And if I do ls, you can kind of see ... bop, bop, bop. So that's been really useful. So I found Fish Shell for an interactive shell. Great, wanted to use that, but then I would have to merge everything over. So Dorothy figured out, or I figured out and put it in, and that's when Dorothy was kind of born, this way of having cross-shell compatible environment configuration. So a way to write things once and have it available to all the different shells. Now, the other thing, manual machine operations, if you're installing a new machine, you just got your new laptop, you'll probably spend like 3 days installing everything, configuring your Ruby, configuring your Node, configuring your developer environment, installing all the apps, making sure the settings are exactly perfect. When Dorothy has things for that to completely automate you. So yeah, assist the machine operations. So shell specific, cross shell support, operating system specific in the old way, cross OS support. It supports, in this talk, I'll show it running on Mac as well as Ubuntu. And you don't get any ecosystem benefits if you're doing it yourself. Let's say Homebrew decides to drop the way it does MPEG and puts it into a tap, or something in your developer environment, you know, hasn't upgraded and you got to figure it out. Well, with Dorothy, instead you have this community where they figure it out, and then you just roll out in the benefits as an end user of this developer operations. And so it really allows a new machine to be set up in minutes rather than in days. Minutes, as in like 30 minutes, because the internet is slow, but we'll demo that in the background. So it really makes things really quite easy. So big change to 2013 and set up env. Now, how many people here are familiar with dot files and shells and prompts? All right, pretty much everyone. How about you? All right, okay. So I will do a demo on my Mac to kind of just show you some of the magic. So this is my Mac's terminal. Let me know if that's still readable, because you're going to get a whole lot of output. Is that still good? All right, so let's say I want to update everything on my Mac. So this is going to make sure Xcode is actually properly licensed, which is... All right, everyone look away while I grab my SSH key. All right. All right, so that's going to update Dorothy. Now it's going to update my user configuration, make sure that's up to date. And it's also going to make sure that if I prefer SSH, it uses SSH. And if I prefer HTTPS, it'll convert into that. And it'll also test whether if I prefer SSH, SSH actually works. And if not, it'll give me the option of falling back to HTTPS. So now it's going through Homebrew and making sure everything's updated with Homebrew. So it's untapping repositories that I don't care about anymore. It's tapping new repositories. So for instance, fonts and FFmpeg. FFmpeg is what we use when we want to download videos from YouTube and encode them. Or convert our home movie library to something else. And then update, make sure some internals of Homebrew are also updated. Now, this was a real challenge when Apple released the M1, the Apple Silicon platform. Because, so these errors, if you see an error in Dorothy and Dorothy continues, the error is just there for information. It's something that isn't actually breaking anything. Dorothy's very intelligent in detecting what's actually fatal and what's not. So that's like right now. You can ignore these errors. Right, so now it's uninstalling formats we don't care about. It's cleaning up. Now it's running brew upgrade, making sure everything's upgraded. And it's giving us like just the information we kind of care about as well. And there's this magic ability to kind of clean our output. So as it's going, we'll see that right now it's running this command. And once it's done, it cleans it. But if there is an error, we will get that output and it will show it. So Homebrew is all done. Now it's going to make sure my Git is configured perfectly. My SSH agent is working, my GPG encryption is working, my GitHub host is actually recognized. I don't have to do that. Yes, confirm I wish to connect to this SSH host again. So now Git's all sorted. And then now it's going through Rust, making sure Rust is all done. Now I'll go through Node.js to make sure Node.js is all done. This actually supports Node Version Manager, which is the best convention for kind of working with Node.js. So I can, and all of this is configurable. I'll show you as a end user how this was just setup-update. There's also setup-install. But it all just goes very easily into some configuration. Now it's installing my global NPM packages that I like. But while that's doing it, whoop, that's my one password. Let me kind of show you this user configuration then. So for my fonts, that's my fonts. For NPM, which is what it's doing now, it's just the bash array. You guys probably need that bigger. And I'll hide this side. So I just have a setup.bash configuration file, and it's inside my user configuration repository in a config directory called setup.bash. So npm install, I just tell it the package names that I want. These ones commented out are ones I don't use anymore. Cargo with Rust ones, and then setup utils are kind of a Dorothy one where we've written cross-platform installers for all of these different utilities. So at least these are the ones that I actually care to install. So right now it's moved on to Ruby. Now it supports different Ruby versions, like detecting, hey, we detected multiple Ruby versions on your machine, like the Mac one or the Brew one, or someone that was installed for some special dependency. Which one do you actually want to use? Which one do you want to install your gems against? Same thing for Python. In Python, it's a very complex system. There's pip, there's pipx, there's Python 2, there's Python 3, and different dependencies will work against different Python versions. And trying to do this like yourself is crazy, which is why I did it once, and then I hope it can scale out to everyone. So we can kind of see here that, yeah, for pipx, it's installed these ones. One of them, I think, doesn't install correctly with pipx, so it's installing through something else. So, and all of this, like 99% of this is just done in Bash. Like all of this fancy stuff, like people would be like, oh, you got to write this in Go or Rust. We're like, no, Bash. So now it's doing the setup utils, that's the end bit. Powering through them. Now it's just cleaning up, removing any stuff only relevant to temp files that can be purged. And that's it. So now my whole system is upgraded, and all my packages that I want are actually installed. There's actually a setup-install. This is if I'm setting up a new machine, and this will kind of be a more walkthrough guide to configuring my computer. So if I would run it, actually we won't run it on my Mac. I will run it on my brand new Ubuntu machine. So we can see the process of installing Dorothy and its power to go straight up. So you can see that it's brand new, and you can see it because I had to add terminal to the sidebar there. Whoop. All right. Every Dorothy. While that's doing it, we got a sudo apt. Is my audio so good because that fell? Okay, good. Make it bigger, you mean? How do I do this? There we go. Is that better? It's because it's in a virtual machine. There we go. Control Shift. The one you said Control Shift is on the money. All right. So sudo apt curl, sudo apt install curl bash get. So they're the basic dependencies to get Dorothy going. Yeah, we want to install them. Now Dorothy's got these multiple different modes. So we've got this trial mode. This is if we wanted like just run one single command. So the example is, what is my IP? So if we ever want to know what our IP is, we can run that, and it'll help us there. And this one will actually set up an interactive shell where we can run multiple things at a time. So we can skip them. That's more if we're curious. And right now, we're just going to go straight on into the full install. And I will have to make this a little bit smaller just so I can see what I'm doing. That is amazing. I can make it bigger, but I can't make it smaller. I'm doing the Control Shift ones. All right. Custom font. All right. largest size 5 font I've ever seen. All right. All right, so that's cloning out Dorothy. Now it's asking where we would put our user configuration. Normally I would do GitHub, and then I'd enter my details, so it would use my user configuration repository. But for this demo, we're just going to go with local. So it's created an empty Git repository that will then house the configuration as it goes. Now, in the meantime, right now it's installing some dependencies to do more advanced things like configuration management. That may be improved on this initial Dorothy installation experience. Maybe I'll be able to get rid of that. However, it's very tricky because trying to support edge cases means you need more advanced tools. And the more advanced tools you use, then the more things you have to install right up. But it's not anything really big. So if you were to install Dorothy, you would say, okay, Dorothy will now confirm the modifications required to have it loaded by your shell. So it will say detect which are the typical dot files that our environment exposed. So right now here's profile. And then in this case, it's say the above file is probably deprecated with Dorothy. Would you like to replace it? Now, if you have put your dot file configuration in one of these, don't say yes. But if you've never modified your dot files before, then you can just say yes, right? YOLO, I'm going to go with Dorothy. I trust Ben. I think, you know, everything I'm seeing today is amazing. So right now we're good. So right now Dorothy is installed, and we'll go and open a new terminal to get started. Oh my God. All right, let's see if I can fix this. Maybe not. Size 20 will be the mark now. All right, good. Now, let's get started with Dorothy. Boom. Okay, command not found. This is because some Linux distributions decide to say that it is not, you shouldn't be running a login shell, but you should because you're the user. So a login shell is just a way of telling the shell prompt, I am the actual user. And it allows the shell to load things more effectively. So now that we've told terminal to actually be a login shell, now if we run Dorothy, we'll see that it works. What action shall we do? So we'll say right now we'll install the theme, and we'll go with the Oz theme. And right now the theme's applied, so let's open a new one, and we can see that's changed. So right now with Dorothy, the whole power of Dorothy, let's go with our setup install now. We'll say yes. So this is an instance where it's validating the configuration for that repository, and it's saying, hey, you prefer SSH, but SSH wasn't available because this is a brand new machine. I haven't configured my SSH keys. Shall we try HTTPS? So HTTPS worked fine. Let's continue. And then it's erroring right there on this local configuration for the user repository because it's an empty repo. It hasn't connected to any remotes. If you were to select GitHub or GitLab, you wouldn't have that issue. So right now, we already installed Dorothy, so it's just prompting us with the things we already know. Now this is where the magic starts happening on new installs. So this one here is update Grub with recovery hotkey. So it turns out if your Linux machine completely freezes, let's say you have a little Raspberry Pi that's running as a server not connected to anything, you can actually enable some Grub commands to actually safely shut down the machine. Like it's just like command control REISUP, right? And then you safely shut it down rather than corrupting your memory card and then having to put it in the bin. So what that does is it actually enables this thing that should be on by default. So this one configures apt. And right now we're saying, hey, do you want to install some other things you probably want on Linux? So yeah, we want Flatpak, a whole bunch of things use Flatpak. Let's do it. And this will take a while, so we're just going to keep bouncing back in between this Ubuntu machine while it configures everything that it does. All right, So demos, yep, demo system update, demo system install, demo configuration. All right. We gotta confirm things here. You can also interrupt me at any point. And I will help to explain things. So this is actually a good example of this type of configuration. So Flatpak, it actually requires these things to be added to your environment. But Dorothy, when it detects Flatpak is installed, will add those things. So where does all this magic come in with Dorothy? So we start off, the way Dorothy works is you'll have your ... So let's say edit ... bash rc. All right. So it tells our normal ... Right, why aren't you closing? All right. So it tells our normal bash configuration to source Dorothy's init script. And our Dorothy provides two init scripts. It provides one for shell and it provides one for fish. Fish and shell, not compatible syntaxes. So that's, fish is like absolutely fantastic for an interactive prompt. But for shell scripting, you got to rewrite everything. So what happens is we can see here that it's going to be loading .fish scripts later. So this is the part which says, hey, are we running as a login shell? In which case, continue with the loading of Dorothy, because we don't want Dorothy to be loaded on every single bash invocation, because that would be really slow. Every time we run a bash command, it has to reload all of Dorothy. So, and this is the one for fish. This is the one for any POSIX compatible shell, which is Z shell and a few of the dash ones and a whole bunch of other ones. So Z shell and bash are the main ones that people use. And this is like a whole bunch of comments on all the different type of trickery that you have to deal with to do this properly across different environments. So this detects, that we are actually a login shell, in which case, yes. So init.shell and shell.shell. So we can see a little pattern here. Now, if we go into sources, these are things that are, why is the outline? All right, so we can see in the sidebar, these are all things that Dorothy can source. For us right now, we care about this init. So right now, turn off mail check. We don't care for that unless we're running a server. And some other things, and then sources environment. And fish will do the same thing. It'll source a environment.fish. We got environment.shell and environment.fish. So what does this do? This evals this setup environment commands command. And it's the same thing here, but we tell it to use the active shell. So fish is the only one with fish syntax, so that's fine. But for bash and Z shell, we need to pass it over an argument so it knows exactly which one it's crafting it for. So if we go into commands and go scroll, then eventually we will find the one we want, set up environment commands. So all this normal stuff, if we go back all those years to this version first commit in 2013 of my Dotfiles that became Dorothy's, you can see like this part right here, right? Is NVM present on the system? In which case, load NVM, right? Pretty simple. NVM is a little bit more complicated because it's quite buggy, so we only want to load it when we want to. Otherwise, it could crash our home prompt, as good and respectable as those people are, but we'll walk through this. So here's one for Ruby gems, making sure that we've loaded the correct gems for the correct. You could have multiple gem installs on your machine at the same time with different gems. Very infuriating, but that's the way it is. That makes it available. So here's some of the configuration magic. Editors configuration, m.bash. We'll go into configuration later. So path, man path, laying, XDG configuration. Then we've got, we'll just scroll through it. I don't really need to code it. But these are all the things. So it detects what your environment is currently capable of, and then it'll adjust your environment variables accordingly. So your shell prompt variables. So instead of ever installing that brew package and it'll be like, hey, you need to update this environment variable, this will do it for you. So every single time Brew's ever complained to me about one of those things, bang, and it goes here. Bop, bop, bop. And this is like a Linux, so all of this is Mac's way of doing it. This is Linux ways of doing it. Here we got that little MVM one that we saw earlier. But instead of loading MVM here, it's just configuring the directory. We can load it in only when we need to. So we just keep going. Pop, pop, pop. And finally, we get here. So at the end, Dorothy puts on its commands, then the user commands, and then the local commands. So Dorothy will prefer your commands over its commands. And this allows you to extend Dorothy. If you don't like the way Dorothy does something, you can extend the way Dorothy does it. So it's really primed for user configuration. And once all that's done, then eventually, our environment's loaded. So if we were to look at what that is, so set up environment commands, and we'll say output the environment. Okay, so that won't do anything because it knows there's no changes necessary. But if I was to do that in a non-login prompt, right, and bash, there's a certain flag to be like, don't include any environment. All right, you can trust me for it. But yeah, the initial setup of that, actually, I'll show you the way how to do it. Actually, you can figure it out when you're playing. I don't want to spend time on that, but that's the magic, right? So rather than like coding that again for fish or reporting that into fish syntax, or every user doing the same modifications to the Dotfile, where Brew just like, hey, make this little change here when you install Anaconda. Well, instead it's like, why doesn't it happen for us? So this is what Dorothy does. So that's the first bit that Dorothy initializes for us. That's the important bit. Now, if it's an interactive shell, then Dorothy will continue with shell. So now it'll load a few other things like our SSH agent. So we don't have to keep entering our SSH key all the time, and same with our GPG key. All right. So how's our Ubuntu machine going? All right, right now it's installing all the nerd fonts. Because otherwise in your terminal, you could get like little things that don't display while that's doing its thing. We can see, yeah, so it went through snap and it did snap fine, flatpak fine, and now it's going through and doing all the node fonts. And normally that would be very pretty, but because I'm zoomed in so far, the way the terminal renders things is via columns and rows rather than by lines. So when you're clearing things, you're actually moving the cursor up one or left one or down one or right one. So long lines, I can sometimes mess with it, but it's something that I can kind of improve. But this is an edge case. You're not ever going to use the computer that's zoomed in. All right, question? Was it? Yep. Yeah, so it could be one of them because we do. Okay, this is the really old one. Yeah, so we have like some usage here in terms of different ways of doing it, and also we have a special like Cloudflare worker here that will also invoke things differently. But it's not with the limited time, I'll leave it up for self-discovery. So that's great. Now, what about like one of these commands that we can do? So let's go with echo file would be like one. So this is like a structure of a typical Dorothy command. We got this little function here, and rather than a curly brace, we've got a normal roundy brace here. This creates like a subshell one where everything inside is proper local, like these functions are also local. It helps to read the bash manual. So that's kind of nice. And then we can source it, or we can invoke it directly. So at the end, you'll see this fire if invoke standalone. So if we're just calling echo file in our terminal, let's say echo file readme, then yes, I would like Visual Studio to have access to my file system. So we'll see that it worked there, fine. And that's because it'll execute this, it'll pass this file, and then it'll reach this and it'll be like, yes, we are running here. Now, sometimes some commands will do this tricky thing called which, or source which eval helper, or something else. And this will allow us to like call the command against functions inside that command. Which isn't, that's like some pretty technical detail, probably not that important for now. But let's go back to echo file. But yeah, so here we've got then argument passing. Well, we have got a help section up the top. That's how to use the command. We've got some argument passing here of a fairly standard format. Our checks there, and then our action. And this is the action that will do the echo file. So detect what's available in our system and then use the abilities available on our system. And yeah, and then it's done. All right, that's the Mac one. How's Ubuntu going? All right, so one of the other things, this is like a 2,000 line command, is DNS configuration. Very difficult. If anyone's ever tried to like programmatically do the DNS on Linux across the distros, like I think maybe I'm one of the only people in the world who may have actually achieved it. So yeah. So we've got the selection here of AdGuard Home, Cloudflare, DNS script, or system. These all work. And Cloudflare is, so these ones are preferable because they offer encrypted DNS. Encrypted DNS is like a free VPN without the privacy invasion of someone snooping in on all your traffic. So encrypted DNS is quite nifty. And it also prompted me to do it because it turns out my ISP at home intercepts with my DNS, which one of my Docker virtual machines would fail because it detected, it's like a security policy in the Docker container to not continue running if it detects the DNS is intercepted. So another benefit of encrypted DNS. Right now we'll go with system. So I wish to create a Cloudflare tunnel, so that'll allow me to like remote into my computer at home or any of my numerous computers, like my servers. Which DNS provider do I want to use for this example? I'll just go with Cloudflare. And now this detects again how DNS is done on this particular system, and then will adjust the DNS as well as the capabilities of the DNS provider for the service. So it knows that Cloudflare supports DNSSEC as well as DNS over TLS. So it enables this with the system built-in service, which is systemd resolve there. That verifies it works. Another one we can do is host files, blocking things through our host files. That gives us a bunch of options there. And now it's just gonna continue through. This is getting some binaries, setting up Git. So this is the one that before, with an existing configuration, it just zoomed by on my Mac machine. And this one, we're going to get a series of prompts once it's installed what's necessary for Git to actually function well. So right now it's installing better diff utilities. All right. It's installing Rust because that will be required by one of the tools. And that could be, all right, let's go to, all right, demo configuration, demo utilities. All right, so configuration works by this user configuration directory. So there's the Dorothy directory, which has commands, config, sources, themes, and user, and these are net scripts. And there's also user directory, and this is our own repository. This goes to Git itself. So for instance, on GitHub, this is my one that Dorothy clones down. And this is one of another collaborator right here. And we can see in a Dorothy user config, there's commands.local commands and config. He doesn't have config.local, but I do. So this is what your typical Dorothy user configuration will look like. Now in my case, I've got these little commands.local, and if I go and click them, we'll get some stuff here. So by default, the .local one is for commands you want private. These can be things that contain sensitive keys or things on just stuff you don't want revealed to the public and committed to a public Git repo. So by default, they get ignored. However, there's a tutorial to do it where you use Strongbox to actually encrypt these things. So they're encrypted publicly. So you can still benefit from syncing them across multiple machines. So inside config, we've got different configuration for different things. That's the setup one. This is my configuration for Git. That's public. If we were, I won't show you the private one, probably because there's reasons why it's private. Environment, this is anything that I need to put in the shell environment. Same thing here. So these are where aliases go. And there's a good explanation kind of at the top of what goes, well, not there, but inside the documentation, there's good documentation about it all. This is a theme one, so for changing my wallpapers as well as my VS Code instantly. I did this earlier before the talk where I can just do Mac OS theme, light or dark, and it'll change everything accordingly. Yeah. It is because of the way not use export keyword in this work. It would probably be, yeah, so right now it'll say nothing is using this variable, like nothing is consuming it, we're only defining it. And the reason why is because it's getting source. So that's what that particular shell check is disabling. And some will tell you to use export and some won't. So for instance, this one will tell you to do it, and also to place it all at the start. So it turns out Bash version 3, if you don't do the definition and the declaration, so the assignment and the declaration on different lines, Bash version 3 may just throw it out. That was a few days wasted debugging that issue. Yeah, well, Bash version 3 is also very old, except it's the one that the latest macOS uses, because they moved to Z Shell and they downgraded the Bash version because they don't want to risk, I think, the GPL license of Bash. So yeah, so that's that. And then we can see there's a whole bunch of commands here. So these are commands that I use, but I don't feel like good enough for Dorothy. So by all means, go crazy, add as many of your own commands as you want. And then if other users will start being like, hey, that's a good command, then the Dorothy team will pull that in. So we've got ones here for like upgrading all my NPM packages. Here's one for certain torrent-related activities. Here's one for, yeah, just scraping things off YouTube. What else would be good? That one's for cryptocurrency portfolio. Okay, so this one's a good one. This will actually go into one of the good things. So one of the, two of the projects I manage is the Beverly Discussion Forum, which is a Beverly Discourse instance here, as well as the one for the country of Liberland, which is a libertarian country between Serbia and Croatia. So these two. Now, again, maintaining where have you gone? Maintaining a discourse instance, also something we can get assistance with. Why do I have to remember these commands all the time or put it in a wiki document? And we will see some magic here behind the scenes. So some of the great tooling that Dorothy gives us. So if I was to go into my trusty little terminal, now say discourse, I'll say, yep, I want to log into Beverly. Do my sudo password. And I'm inside Beverly, the Beverly Discourse forum. I could do the same thing for Liberland. And this one, because it should be a different SSH key, I may get an SSH key prompt. Or because, no, I don't, because my agent's doing its job. Right. So that's another thing. That's entering your SSH keys all the time with our agent. But if I were, then there's this great little command called secret, which interacts with 1Password. So right now, I'm actually getting values directly from my 1Password rather than just dumping them all in my end. And then I expose it only to the commands that actually need it by using secret env at the right times. This particular command doesn't use secret env, but other commands do. This choose option one is another great piece that Dorothy provides, so I can pop up a question. We saw that menu before, a filter, and then my options here. And there's a bunch of commands like that that make life way easier. So check in on this. Right, it's still going. One of the annoying things about the VMs is it can sleep like the process. So I think that process probably went to sleep while we're talking. All right, so where's my presentation? So some of these commands, edit is a good one. So typing edit, and then let's just edit Go Dorothy. We already have that open. It'll open up, that's opening up the file, right? But it went with VS Code. Now, if I was inside a SSH session, so remoting into a different one, then I'll use Vim. And that is done through my editor's configuration. So here I list my preferences for terminal editors. So it actually turns out, apparently, I prefer Nano. And then you can order these however you actually want. And then for GUI editors, I prefer VS Code, then maybe Atoms, Sublime, and then gedit. And then these are ones that I don't like, which is why they commented out. So that's one of the great little things. Just type edit and then you're good. Down, GitHub download, unzip. These are for downloading things from the internet. So rather than doing wget or aria2, I can just do down and then the URL, and then I'll use whatever is the best tool currently available in the system. For GitHub download, I can use this to scrape stuff off GitHub, which is what we use to install a lot of utilities. And same thing for unzip, tar. This will unzip zip files or tar, gz files or tar files. And they kind of work harmoniously together in a really nice way. So if we were to down, let's say riprep, I must have done that earlier, we get like a nice little thing for that. Right, DNS and host, we saw that earlier. Secret, kind of communicated about that. CPR is good for like doing rsync or copying files with verification. So either like huge terabyte of data from like one hard drive to another hard drive, that's got you covered. And also detect what tools you have available. And if you're doing a certain operation, they'll be like, hey, rsync is probably the way to go. It'll say you probably want to install rsync. And it'll also avoid certain issues with that. Checksum is a little tool for doing checksum. So it's just checksum. Up. Let's go that ripgrep one. I need my ... All right, which one? So this actually detects from what's available on my system. Right now, they're all available. So we go sha, and that probably got cleared because it's meant to be used inside a value like that. You can trust me on that one. Is same is another one. Verifying. This actually is great because it checks the pass, the real pass, okay, symlinking, the structure, the checksum. So I only do checksums of terabytes of data if it needs to. If it already knows the structures are different or the sizes are different, it doesn't need to do checksums. So this is, again, very useful tool. macOS theme, macOS drive. Want to set up a macOS installer make a bootable macOS installer. macOS drive has you covered. Want to change macOS settings. And this one has you covered. Select which ones you actually want to change. All right, GPG, OpenSSL. We want to do encryption. Whoop. There's two helpers here for different tooling. So the sparse vault, if you want to create a encrypted vault on your computer, sparse vault's got you covered. So I can, there's projectors kind of blurred on the side. Oh, I don't have the right help text in there. But speaking of which, there's a Twitter helper. This one is great for deleting tweets, or for instance, if you download your Twitter data archive, it's got a list of all the advertisers to you. If you then do that, it's going to grab the usernames, and then you can pipe that into a block. Ooh. So then you block all your Twitter advertisers, or all the advertisers advertising to you. All right, Sharebox, BTRFS Seedbox. This is for those Raspberry Pi clusters. I've got like 40 terabytes of data over like 8 USB drives connected to one Raspberry Pi. And that's running as like a share box and a seed box on this BTRFS cluster, or ButterFS. So this is something very tricky. People really struggle with that, and Dorothy has tooling for that. Config helper for updating configurations, MailSync, Google admin recently. Google recently shut down the G Suite, or the workspace thing, on the free tier. So then I had to move all my emails from Google Workspace to iCloud, and that is a tool to help you do that. It leverages a tool called MailSync, but it provides that brilliant kind of Dorothy expectation on how to deal with it. So those are the big ones for the utilities. All right, I'm thinking this presentation format will not work for this coding section because the text is too small. However, if you go to the Dorothy README, you will find guides which will get way better as the week progresses. Because some may, some of them are fairly good already. But getting started with Dorothy, conventions in Dorothy, coding with Dorothy, coding with Bash, roadmap. So those are presentation, convention, standard in args. So one of the examples is, let's find one that does it. Most of the echo commands let's find one that kind of does it. Let's go with, actually, I prepared some before this talk. So if we go to our user, got my little demo one here. So this is like, let's say, our most basic Dorothy command. So we source this, which is strict mode for Bash. You can find the explanation of it inside Dorothy. Oh, that's the user. Inside Dorothy sources. So this is an explanation of everything. It turns out it kind of just means we respect it when things crash. So all right. So we can actually capture error exit codes. I thought that was my phone. All right. So if we were to run this one here, demo 01 rainbow. All right, what is a favorite color? Someone say favorite color. Green. All right, so now we've got green text. All right, go blue. All right, something else? How about we go purple plus blinking? Why did it not blink? Maybe the 2 seconds is too short. Echo style. All right, purple plus. Oh, you know what it'll be? Visual Studio Code terminal won't support the blinking. All right, demo 01 rainbow. All right, purple plus blink. Yeah, there we go. All right. What about, let's say, red plus green background? What about error? Or H1? All right, so we've got a whole bunch of styles actually built in, and we kind of saw some of them earlier. One of them is like, say, echo segment. And we can see we kind of get this little bit here. So that'll be the beginning of a segment, that'll be the success part, and this will be the error part if the segment failed. We can see echo element is another one of these that are kind of used. And there's actually good documentation about those commands. So that's this one. So we've just got a while true, and we've got this ask thing. So ask is pretty nifty. It's one of these, there's ask, there's confirm, and there's true's true's options. These are ones which are really nifty. So ask, give us a question. Ask doesn't take arguments. I don't know why it's going arguments. So yeah, sup, enter value, suppity. Right, and it won't be outputted because again, this is one made for consumption in a command, not one made for end users. So if I was to do ask question sup, then you get it. Confirm. This is a great one here. So we get the little blinking bits. We can go boop. It's great because it has these like intimate details on the next side. Now this abort part is interesting. It killed the terminal. And that's because a negative return code, which would be like say 1, is also a failure code along with aborts. So we need to respect aborts by, like if someone just pressed Control-C, they actually want to kill things. They don't want to say no. So if you were doing like a really long process, like say set up DNS, then you were like, oh, let's say select something else, and then we press Control-C, I want that to actually exit. I don't want that to say no, or just continue going or do something completely unexpected. So that's why confirm always needs the PP ID. In Bash, it would be like that, but my prompt right now is fish. Then the other one is choose option. And we can also give it a question. So which one? And I spelled question wrong. And then I can go. And if I want multiple, I just go pop. So really cool how it actually hides the content and everything like that. It's really nifty. Another one is, let's say eval helper, and we'll say quiet, and we will say, let's waiter 2. Taking a break for 2 seconds. And now it disappears. So eval helper allows us to invoke things, but then hide it away, make it disappear. If I were to remove the quiet, then it still hides away the details here because it didn't fail. Now, if I was to do fail 2, then, well, fail doesn't take an argument, but we get the details, right? Which is kind of a good example of that. So if there is a failure, we still get the details. But if we're in quiet, we only get a summary, right? And it's a self-closing element, right? If we've done XML or HTML. We know open element, closed element, self-closing. So all this like really nifty abilities to kind of build powerful developer operations tooling. Standard in args allows us to take an argument. So count is one of these ones. Right, that's a more complicated one, count. So this count example is one that does it. So standard in args is this source, like this little helper that we get, and it allows us to define certain functions for different actions. On input accepts arguments as well as standard in. So this particular count can be used in two different ways. So it can be used via standard in arguments, or it can be used via, standard in data, or it can be used via arguments. And same for demo. This one is a more extensive version where we now support the words argument. So this is like a good example of supporting options where we can either choose words or characters. So an example of that would be, let's say, echo 04 count. So what's the words? If we were to get rid of that, that's what's the characters. And if we were to do echo lines, hello world, hello. Get the same result. So that's really, really helpful for coding things, especially when you're like knee deep in something, and then you can just pipe it directly to an echo. And we'll see throughout Dorothy, we've done that dozens of times. So that's standard in args, help arguments. We kind of went about that eval helper TTY. Some things are really complex, like the choose option, how it does this, and it creates a whole new shell. But then when we select one, it disappears to the previous instance. So that's done by this TTY helpers that Dorothy provides. And we also have ones for updating configuration. All right. How's this Linux machine gone? Yeah, it just went to sleep while I was doing the other stuff. But that will, if it was not a VM, I would have a completely configured Ubuntu machine by now. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. Some of the parts is, this would be an example here of applying different configuration for different machines. So my DNS configuration, it checks what host name it currently is, and then it will adjust the DNS configuration according to what machine it is. And the other ones do similar things. So that's how my server is, for instance, my one of my servers is actually able to be its server and whatnot. So yeah. Alrighty. I think that's as good as I can do with such small text. So because I don't want to, I think it makes itself clear, right? Like some of these commands are like set up DNS, the one for handling that cross-compatible encrypted DNS stuff. It's pretty long. So yeah, but it works great. And so yeah, really happy with it. Yeah. Alrighty. If you want, I can help you set up. But yeah, this is the end of the actual talk part. And yeah, if you want to try it without it modifying anything, then that's what this trial mode is. It won't modify your dot files, and so everything will stay exactly the same. It just clones Dorothy and then gives you a shell into that Dorothy instance. And then the install one, it actually needs to modify your dot files. Cool. And then other than that, everything's there. So with that, the end. Yep, at the back. Yeah, oh yeah, so the question is whether a Windows emulation layer, be it like Git Bash, I think another one, there was other ones in the day, the Ubuntu subsystem for Linux is another one. So there's several efforts on Windows to emulate Unix type stuff. A very popular one is called Git Bash, and will Dorothy potentially work with that? It certainly could, and there's when I've done things for, say, setup utils, oh man, that's one of the ones I didn't cover. So one of the amazing bits, one of those little commands that does amazing stuff is the setup util. And it supports like all these different package managers, and even like custom ones. So let's say I want to install ARIA. Then I just say setup util, what's the CLI in case it's already installed, then brew apk app pacman. What about bash? Right, so this is bash bash completions. So it's like how to install these things in a completely cross-compatible way. So, and then at the end, when me as my little consumer, like me as a consumer, all I have to do is just mention these things and set up utils. And then I get a install that works everywhere. So that's great. But we'll see some of these like Choco and somewhere else there'll be like Nugget, Windows-based ones. So where there is, I haven't taken any efforts to not make it work on Windows. So it's not going to be like you're on Windows, you pleb, and then kick you off. So it could work. I just haven't tried it just because I don't have a Windows machine, and I also don't have access to a computer that can run a Windows VM performantly enough. Which is also when Dorothy got a lot of more uptake was when people were moving from Windows to Ubuntu. And then they started using Dorothy to set that up. So good luck with that. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's what I like say at the very beginning of the talk, which is like, well, who's it for? And right now it is collaborator mindset for probably the next 6 months until there's like paid sponsorship, like sizable paid sponsorship. Then it's still going to be a thing where other people who want to help other people should kind of be the ones using it, and that way we can make it better together. Which is how, yeah. So yeah, right now there's kind of 3 collaborators on it, and one of them's pretty big, but yeah, nothing compared to the founder of a project where it's like 32,000 lines changed in like 3 months. Yeah. All right, other questions? Yeah.
Great product, like the labor of love, 10 years plus. But have you thought about breaking apart some of the functionality into separate projects rather than all within one?
Yeah, so plenty of times I felt like for the secret command or those larger ones like setup util, it would be like, man, it would be great if this, like, I could get this out to more people and publish it as a package, right? But then it'll be like, well, then I have to publish all the other things it uses as a package, like that choose option, the ask thing, the command is the command error, the command not. And then at the end, you still have the issue of people are then trying to run these commands in an environment that is like haphazard. So the Dorothy user configuration option is a great way for that, where Dorothy will then source like your user configuration. And then it's just like, you do whatever you want, right? Like you could source another repository, you could download things from the internet, you could do whatever you want, right? So we have one little issue here on the roadmap, which is multiple repo configuration. And this is just saying like, hey, it could be done now, right? Where your user configuration just clones out another thing, or where we can just download other people's specific files from other people's Dorothy configurations, right? Like, and we kind of already do that with, like, we have the ability to do that with that set download. So just like today, for instance, this is what I coded in like an hour this morning. I added this GitHub slug thing. So right now, SD doesn't have an APT, like an Aptitude package for Ubuntu. So to install SD, you have to install Rust on Ubuntu. That's not particularly pleasant when you just want to install Dorothy, which uses SD for updating configuration files. So instead, what this does is it just downloads the right file from the releases. And then the other ones will use this download pop. All right, that's the other one. The 1Password client, I just give it a URL, and it just downloads it, and then here's an unzip filter to apply to it. So there's certainly like room for growth there, but it's going to be something which is like wait and see and do it when it happens. And that's kind of been the approach with the docbad call, which is go crazy in your personal configuration, and then the docbad call kind of watches and observes, and then consolidates and improves.
Cheers for the answer. That's great. Cheers.
Yeah. Cool. Yep. So right now, yeah, there's a discussions thing. I've got different categories here, how to get started, and the most important links, yeah, right there in the README. And yeah, if you just want to experiment with it, then the trial mode, completely risk-free, go with that. Otherwise, if you're ready to commit and get those benefits, then go with the install option. Cool, thank you, everybody. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.